This video is made possible by donations to the United States Lighthouse Society from people like you.
You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is USLHS volunteer Sarah McHugh. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Jeremy.
Today is October 16th, 2022, and this is episode 195 of Lighthearted. This is part two of a two-parter about Wood Island Light Station in southern Maine, which for my money is one of the most beautiful and historic light stations in New England. Sarah, you and I visited Wood Island in late August. Would you recommend it as a place to visit?
I would absolutely recommend it as a place to visit. I had such an incredible time and was so blown away by everything, the sights, the history, the ghost stories, all of it. So definitely would recommend.
Good. I concur. Just a quick recap. Wood Island is just east of the entrance to the Saco River near the village of Biddeford Pool.
The light station on the island was established in 1808 and was rebuilt in 1839. That's when the 44-foot rubble-stone tower that still stands was constructed. Its lantern room was removed in 1972, but it was later replaced by an aluminum replica lantern.
Friends of Wood Island Lighthouse, which is a chapter of the American Lighthouse Foundation, has been working to restore the light station buildings on Wood Island for almost 20 years now. The organization runs tours to the island in summer from Vines Landing and Biddeford Pool. Before we hear part two of our interview about Wood Island, we're going to look at a couple more video clips from our visit in late August. First, here's one showing the climb up to the top of the lighthouse tower.
This is incredible. And to get the bearings on like where the boat came over, where we landed.
Next, we're going to watch a clip with Brad Coupe talking about the restoration in the upstairs bedrooms in the keeper's house. There's a really beautiful quilt in one of the beds. Sarah, remember that?
Yes, I absolutely do remember that. Among all of the other very cool and beautiful antiques and things is the quilt, which has a pretty cool story along with it.
Yeah. So let's look at the clip about the upstairs bedrooms now.
Charles Albert Burke and his wife had twin boys while they were here, and we have some artifacts that we decided would be nice to acknowledge the twins. So we bought these twin beds. These are period twin beds. They are not the twin beds of the boys, but and populated it with toys that also date from the period. And that's a picture of the two of them. Thomas Henry Orchard was one of the longest, he's the second longest serving keeper, and was one who was present at some of the more important stories, Sailor being one. We've called this the Orchard room. This bed was built by Goldthwaite, I think it is his name, who married one of Thomas Henry Orchard's daughters. It didn't ever live out here, but the daughter did. And when she got married, this was her husband's wedding gift to her. This is a quilt that was prepared by Terry Lowell. She is the wife of Russell Lowell, who was the keeper here from 1979 to 1982. And on the occasion of our restoration, she did it and presented it to us. And it's a beautiful quilt.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that it is the quilt. The quilt takes the form of the house as it looks today and as it looked back in 1905 or 6, but not when Terry's husband Russell was the keeper, because the keeper had already, a prior keeper had already closed in that porch. We have pictures of it downstairs. But she has quilted the house as it looked in 1906 and as it looks today.
There are 3 guests in today's interview. Richard Parsons is the historian for Friends of Wood Island Lighthouse and author of the new book, Wood Island Lighthouse, Stories from the Edge of the Sea. George Bruns is the chairperson of Friends of Wood Island Lighthouse, and Brad Coupe is one of the founders of the organization and the past chairperson.
Thanks, Sarah. So let's go to part 2 of our interview about Wood Island Light Station in Maine now. Another one of the most famous stories related to Wood Island, actually, well, peripherally kind of involves Keeper Thomas Orcutt, but it was a murder-suicide on the island in 1896. It may, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think probably that along with Sailor the Dog, those are probably the 2 incidents that if people know anything about the history of Wood Island, those are the most prominent ones. The murder-suicide was written about by Edward Rowe Snow, the late historian, who I talk about a lot in my lectures and so forth, and certainly written about by others over the years. What are the true facts about the murder-suicide in 1896? And any of you can take this. That maybe you want to start.
Well,
but
you go right ahead.
Want me to start? I'll start and then I'll go from there. Okay. So in 1896, there was a dwelling at the western end of the island, and the person who occupied that dwelling was a guy named Frederick Milliken. Also, a part of that property, there was a hennery there, a hen house, which had been converted into a ramshackle kind of dwelling. And in that dwelling were 2 kind of, I call them ne'er-do-wells. They were fishermen, lobstermen, part-time workers, and so forth. One was named Howard Hobbs, and the other was, his name is
Moses.
William Moses, exactly right. So those 2 guys decided in late in May of 1896 that they would go to Old Orchard and have a good time, and that's exactly what they did, and got quite obnoxiously drunk, apparently, because they were stopped by the local law enforcement agent there and told to keep it down, and they promised that they would, and they were left to go on their way. Well, they spent the night in Old Orchard Beach and then made their way back by way of the dummy railroad to eventually they landed again at Hills Beach, where they restocked their supply of alcohol. And by the time they got back to Wood Island, they were really 3 sheets to the wind. And this was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Apparently, Howard Hobbs, according to his partner, William Moses, went back to their little ramshackle dwelling and got his gun, claiming that he wanted to see Frederick Milliken. Now, it's a little bit unclear as to what that was all about there, but probably it had to do with payment of the rent. And Milliken had been sort of after these guys to pay their rent. Apparently they had been somewhat in arrears. At any rate, he got that gun, and when he was asked about it by William Moses, he said, well, I might be able to shoot a bird, but he was really interested in looking for Milliken, and eventually he confronted him just in front of the Milliken home. Milliken asked if the gun was loaded and got a rather ambiguous and obnoxious answer. At which point, Frederick Milliken went back into his house and put on his coat, which had his official badges and so forth on it. He was sort of the equivalent today of a combination of game warden and deputy sheriff stationed out there on the island at any rate. So when he came back out, he asked again if the gun was loaded and reached as if to grab the gun. And when he did that, the gun discharged, shooting Milliken in the stomach. Really a death warrant, but he did not die right away. They took him into the house, and Mrs. Milliken asked Howard Hobbs, the shooter, to run and tell the keeper, Thomas Henry Orcutt, what had happened, which he did. He got Orcutt to the point where they were both ready to go back to the dwelling, to Milliken's dwelling, but Hobbs left first, hurried back to the dwelling, and when he poked his head in there and asked about how Milliken was doing, his wife told him that he had died. At which point, Howard Hobbs went back to his little Henry dwelling place, took the rifle and shot himself. And so the murder-suicide involved the murder of Frederick Milliken and the suicide of Howard Hobbs.
Mm-hmm.
The story, I could embellish it, but that would probably take another hour. So let's pause there.
Yeah.
Those are the true facts anyway.
Yeah. And I know for some people it plays into some of the, let's say, paranormal legends or stories of the place. And we'll get into that in a few minutes. So we talked about one of the shipwreck incidents a few minutes ago, but are there any other especially notable? And again, I know the word notable is kind of a vague word, but are there other shipwrecks in the island's history that really stand out?
I think that stand out for me, and of course there were plenty that we could talk about. But one was the wreck of the Marshall Perrin, which occurred in 1906. And I think it was in November of 1906. The ship was a schooner headed back to Rockland, encountered a rather major storm and tried to wait it out at Richmond Island. Excuse me. While it was there, it lost its anchor. Richmond Island was about 8 miles from Wood Island. But when it lost its chains, it started getting blown back toward Wood Island and was totally uncontrollable. So for 8 hours, for 8 miles, the 3 members of the crew knew that they were doomed in one way or another and had no way to really control their fate. But the one thing that they decided to do was, as they got closer and closer to Wood Island, is to crawl out onto the the bow of the boat anyway, and they were going to jump off of the bow just as the boat went ashore, and that's exactly what they did. One of them, another guy by the name of John Burke, who is no relation to Charles Burke, the keeper, survived, and when he became aware enough to notice, he saw that he was right underneath the lighthouse. So he quickly ran up, got a hold of the keeper there, and by the time they got back to the wreck, it had just been totally destroyed, and there was no sign of either of the other 2 crew members. Eventually, they were able to get in touch with the life-saving station at Fletcher's Neck, And by the next morning, when it arrived, there was really nothing left. They did do a search and eventually found the captain, who had been badly bruised and battered, but the cook they were never able to find. And once again, there was a poem by Waldo Verrill, who wrote about the wreck of the Marshall Perrin. And since I've already read one poem, I think I don't need to read this one. But it's in the book.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And by the way, the second was the wreck of the Item, which was an interesting story because it involves a presidential yacht, which would occasionally pass by Wood Island. And in his logbooks, the keeper made note of the fact that the Mayflower passed by one or two or three times. And that at that time, it was probably Teddy Roosevelt that was on the ship, if the president was on it at all. But the ship that I'm talking about was named the Sylph. It was another presidential yacht, and it happened to be in Biddeford Harbor because the president's sister-in-law owned a cottage there. And President Taft, the wife of President Taft had a stroke, and his sister-in-law had gone to Washington, D.C. to care for her sister, and to sort of play the role that women had to play in the formalities of presidential politics. But anyway, by July, Mrs. Taft had recovered sufficiently that her sister thought that she could return to Biddeford. And so the president let her borrow his yacht called the Sylph, and it was anchored in Biddeford Harbor, and was an attraction for a lot of people. So a group of folks from the mill decided that they would like to take a little trip out and visit close up and personal this presidential yacht, which is what they did. So about 31 passengers and crew left and sailed down the Saco River and out into the harbor, had a good look at the Sylph. They decided that they would go around Wood Island, which they did. And as they were returning to the Saco River, somehow or other, they were swamped by a rogue wave. There's a kind of a lot of rumors about how that actually happened. But anyway, the boat totally tipped over. All 31 people wound up in the drink. Women, especially with their long skirts and so forth, were at risk. And the bottom line to all of that, it was that 3 of them were actually killed as a result, or died as a result. What was really interesting to me in the 21st century is that afterward, the jury found that the ship itself was unfit to carry passengers, that it was unwieldy. But even after all of that, they said that nothing else needs to be done. So I'm imagining in the 21st century, that would have been lawsuits all over the place. But in 1909, when this incident occurred, even after they discovered that the ship shouldn't have been carrying passengers, they decided that they would let it go. So
Yeah.
those are the two. Those are probably not the 2 most prominent wrecks, but those are the 2 that struck me as being among the most interesting.
Yeah, oh, definitely. So moving forward in history here, I'm sure a lot of our listeners know, of course, the Coast Guard took over the management of lighthouses from the Civilian Lighthouse Service in 1939. Under the Coast Guard, did Wood Island remain a family station? Did you have Coast Guard keepers living there with their families after that?
Yeah, we did for a time.
Mm-hmm.
That was until the families were out there until the late 70s,
Mm-hmm.
when they decided that it should not be a family station anymore. So for a very short period of time, it was not a family station. But for the most part, from 1939 until about late 70s. It was. But the interesting thing to me is that when that change occurred, it caused a change in culture out there as well, because no longer, I mean, up until 1939, the keepers were well into their 50s. Oftentimes when they were out there, they had large families. They would serve sometimes for 8 years or more on the average. The Coast Guard keepers, though, were much younger. They had very small families, usually young kids, and served for less than, well, 2 years or less even. So that meant that the culture itself had kind of changed, with the Coast Guard period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it briefly, near the end of its life as a staffed light station, it was a stag station, as they would say, a male keepers only.
Well, it was of the very end, maybe
at the
3
tail.
or 4 years ago.
Yeah, it was automated when again?
1986.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I know that during the Coast Guard years, there were some stories of strange experiences on the island, and it got a reputation for being haunted. So do any of you have any stories or comments on that?
Don't all talk at once, but
We can find you someone who does, but who
Yeah.
did.
but it's certainly it's one of the things the place has gotten publicity for, certainly over the years.
Well, I can talk about, but George, I've talked enough. George, why don't you?
Well, one of our very dear volunteers is Russ Lowell, and Lowell was out there in the early 1970s, and he tells stories that he and his wife Terry experienced while they were out there, and the one that I like to tell when I'm out there at the lighthouse has to do with the grease pencils. He used to use grease pencils to record weather observations and that sort of thing, and they were always missing. And and he'd get out another one, and a little while later it was missing again. And this went on for a while, and he had other experiences, like his calculator would be turned on in the morning when he knew he turned it off the night before, and Terry would back up and back into somebody who wasn't there, but she could feel that there was someone there. But anyway, as time went on, he happened to go up into the attic one day, and the attic has a stairway that goes up from the second floor, and he started seeing grease pencil marks along the top of the ceiling, near the top of the ladder. And he pushed open the hatch, and there were all of his grease pencils lined up in a line at the top of the on the floor of the attic. And so we often tell that story. But we've had some experiences even this summer with people coming down the stairs of the lighthouse and being the last one down the stairs, but feeling that was someone behind them. We had a rocking chair that started rocking in the living room for no particular reason. Several experiences like that, even on the boardwalk, people felt that there was someone behind them. So who knows?
Well, in 2005 and 2006, the New England Ghost Project came out to the island, and they brought all kinds of equipment and a medium and so forth. At that time, the dwelling was still under construction, but they went upstairs into one of the bedrooms, which, as I say, was still under construction. And this is what they found. There are two people involved in this. One was Maureen, who was the medium, and Karen, who was one of the technical people out there. And Maureen said, "Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, a green light flicked atop the room rafters and along the wall." Karen said, "Oh, wow, look at the green lights." Maureen says the green lights were zipping this way and that, dancing back and forth over our heads, down around our feet. We sat mesmerized like kids watching fireworks for the first time until they just stopped. A green light brushed my cap and shot across the room toward Karen, weaving its way through her hair. Almost instantaneously, Karen's voice echoed my own. Did you feel that? That's for Sarah. Sarah.
I'll just throw in. I know who you're talking. I know Maureen Wood and Karen Mossy and Ron Kolek, the founder and lead guy of New England Ghost Project. He's been involved with our chapter here, Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. And I went out to Wood Island with Ron the first time he scouted the place out before the investigation you're talking about. We went out with another psychic by the name of Vicki Monroe, and she did not take part in the later investigation, but she walked around and she said, oh, there's all kinds of activity here. She felt really strongly about it. So, again, who knows is the bottom line on all of this.
Yeah, I was going to say, when we were out there, it was a beautiful day, and you walk through the lighthouse and all the rooms, and it seems so, it's so charming and lovely and beautiful out there. But then I remember all the volunteers were getting ready to leave the island, and we were kind of the last people. And I was like, okay, it's a little bit of an eerie feeling, like something else is there, and you're walking away from the lighthouse, and you can just kind of feel that eerie feeling following you out.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of you have been there at night, and you probably feel that sort of feeling a bit more after dark than out in the sunlight. Yeah.
We still have a picture that was taken by a friend of ours at night. I think he kayaked out there in November in the middle of the night. And in the photograph, there is a light on in the upstairs master bedroom. And we never saw the light on when we came back there in the spring, and the bulb was not burned out. So we don't know about that.
That's pretty interesting.
My only experience was that when I was out there with the woodchucks one day, they locked me in, left. They had to come back and get me. I don't think it was a ghost, but I didn't encounter any either.
Right. Well, luckily you didn't become another ghost at the lighthouse.
Oh, no, I didn't.
So I guess switching gears back to talking about the Coast Guard years, are there any other interesting stories about Coast Guard life on the island?
Again,
how much time do you have?
Time? Yeah.
Well, yeah, the answer is yes. While Earl Benson was out there during World War II, he is reported to have been up in the tower dodging bullets that were being shot over the island as the Navy was kind of practicing some of its artillery. Much to the chagrin of Mrs. Benson, who every time the Navy shot off its guns, she had to open up the windows, because if they were closed, they were under threat of being broken. So this meant that during foul weather, she would open these windows and all sorts of havoc would be played inside her dwelling. So Mrs. Benson, Alice Benson, was not a happy camper. So that she tells the story that one time, some of the plotters came out to Wood Island, and their job was to sort of track these shells as they were going over the island and letting the shooters know exactly how close they were coming to the target. So she noticed that these plotters were on the island, and that they were taking up a space near a spot where she knew there was just a lot of poison ivy. And so she said in her interview that all things come to those who wait. And she didn't mention anything to anybody about that poison ivy, and went on to say that those plotters never returned to the island. So.
The explanation for those guns firing over, you probably know, up on what is now the golf course of the Abenaki Club, there were gun emplacements during World War II, and they did do some practice. Why they fired near the lighthouse, I don't know, but they were there.
Yeah. Well, I've heard about similar stories at a couple of other lighthouses where they did bombing practice at the wrong island where people were living at the lighthouse and stuff like that. So anyway, let me ask you a question just to clarify something. The lantern of the lighthouse is actually a replica. Is that correct? It was taken off for a while. It was sort of a headless lighthouse for some years with a rotating aero beacon type light at the top, a naked light at the top. And the replica was made, but it certainly looks authentic. And anybody who doesn't know wouldn't know the difference, I think.
Yeah, it is a replica, obviously, and recently we have been told that we're going to be gifted the original aero beacon, which has been found at Portland Headlight in storage. So I don't know where we're going to put it yet, but it's something that's going to come our way.
Wow.
I actually ran into a friend of mine who said that he cast the ball on the top of the new light room when he worked in a foundry down in Massachusetts.
Wow, interesting. That aero beacon you're talking about from Portland Head, I wonder if that's the one that is or was on display in their museum for some years.
I don't know, but it right now it's in three wooden boxes that has been found in storage, and it was labeled as Wood Island. So
wow,
it looks like we're going to be given it. They tell us it's going to remain the property of the Coast Guard.
Right, which is usually the case. Well, that's great news.
So most of the island, other than the light station, was deeded to the Maine Audubon in 1970. What did they do there, and is there a good working relationship with your group?
They don't come out there very often, but they do work with us. They worked with us on an island cleanup in 2021, sent out a number of volunteers to work with us. We took out 30 yards of trash and that sort of thing that had been built up over the years on the island. They recently came out with a brand new sign that tells anyone who's visiting about the types of birds that are on the island. But otherwise, it's a passive reserve. But we do have a good relationship with them. It all started recently. The recent startup was after someone had a fire on our lawn one fall not too long ago, and we decided that we needed to have some new signage to prevent people from camping and having fires and hunting out there. And we called Audubon, and they said, "Yeah, we agree with you." And so that started the move for new signage on both of our parts.
Yeah, I think there was a fairly new sign right near the boathouse, right?
Yes.
Yeah, which was really nice to see when we were last there. So at this point, I'm going to mention that our friend Dick here needs to, I think you have someplace you need to be soon.
I do.
So I'm going to excuse you from the rest of this this discussion here, but I really appreciate your time so much, and your knowledge of the history of the place, of course, is tremendous, and it's all interesting stories. I know there's so much more of that we could talk about, but again, I refer people to your excellent book, Wood Island Lighthouse: Stories from the Edge of the Sea. So thank you so much, Dick, and you are hereby dismissed.
Well, thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here, and we can tell some of those stories another time.
All right, thank you. I hope so. Yeah, we'll have to do it again. Thank you, Dick.
Great. Bye.
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 George and Brad, of course, the place has been largely restored. You've done the FOWIL has done a tremendous job over the years restoring especially the keeper's house. Have you restored it to a specific time period?
As you, Jeremy, and others on this know, the standards that I think they're National Park Service standards, but they're the federal standards applicable to structures in the National Register of Historic Places, which the lighthouse is. They provide a variety of ways to restore a house or a structure, treatments they're called, and at least one of those allows the proprietor to restore to a period of significance. And that enables the restorer to take away things that have been put on since the period of significance and take the lighthouse or the structure back to that period, even though the things that may have been put on would qualify as being of a certain age to be historic themselves. So we chose to follow that method of treatment. And we chose the period of 1906 because that's when the current structure was created, or I should say the Keeper's House evolved into the structure that it is today. And so we've been working and submitting things to the State Historic Preservation Commission, which has supervision of our work on behalf of the Coast Guard. And so we like that period of significance for a variety of reasons. The first being that it does take us back to what we think is this, from an architectural standpoint, the most pleasing iteration of the Keeper's House, and at least in my own mind, to a period before electricity, before modernity came in, and all of those iconic features of lighthouses that we like to talk about, be it the bell tower or the mechanism, the clock tower mechanism, the clock mechanism that rings the bell or turns the light, were important. And the Fresnel lens, which was important for 110 years out there, was still in place. So we feel we've got a special history to show that is much more interesting, and it gives an authenticity to the history of the place and the island. And so we have been doing that and have largely completed it. But George has ambitions for the future.
And yeah, George, is there anything like in the pipeline at this point as far as projects?
It's hard to say anything's in the pipeline because you need to specify projects, but these are the things that we would like to do. We haven't mentioned the fact that part of the reason that the keepers were able to be out at the lighthouse when they were only allowed to leave sporadically during the winter months and that sort of thing is that they were farmers. And this was a saltwater farm for most of its history. And there was a barn out there until probably the late 1930s when the last barn was taken down. We know that when Keeper Burke was there in 1906 to 1914, he had a smaller barn. There used to be a much larger barn out there, which came down, I guess, in the 1890s or early 2000 to 1900s, so he had a small barn out there, and he kept a cow and chickens and that sort of thing. And I gather there were animals out there until the 1930s, and so we would like to evoke that saltwater farm aspect of the lighthouse at some point by rebuilding probably the early 1900s barn. And in the inside, we would have greater space for exhibits and that sort of thing. So that would be one project that we'd like to do. We have recently been talking about the fact that there is a dug well out there. It still exists. And we have discovered, we're going to talk about this tomorrow night, in fact, we have discovered that in Saco, there is a pump identical to a pump that is shown in a photograph of the the Burke family standing by the pump, pumping water for the cow. And so we we're thinking, well, maybe we will be able to do something with that. But other than that, we really have, we have constant maintenance. The boardwalk is now 27 years old. We need to spend time on maintenance. But this year we spent over $20,000 on restoration and maintenance. And so it's been a good year for us.
I just have to note George's idea that the bond would be used for presentations and things. At least some of our members, and one of them on the executive committee in particular, thinks we should have sheep. So that bond may have to house a flock of sheep, and Kyle will be the tender of the shepherd.
Or goats. Goats would be great to clear the remainder of the 8 acres.
Yeah.
When we came out there in 2003, 4, and that sort of thing, the brush came right up to the house, and over time we have been pushing back and creating more lawn area out there. But eventually it would be nice if we could clear more of the 8 acres.
Yeah, I know there's a lighthouse in Massachusetts, Tarpaulin Cove in the Elizabeth Islands off Cape Cod, where they have a herd of Scottish cattle that keep the grass very, very trimmed. So, but I was thinking about the possibility of goats or sheep on Wood Island. You'd have to somehow fence them in or something, right? Because otherwise Audubon might not be too excited about the prospect.
Well, and getting them across the boardwalk might be a bit of a challenge too.
That's true too. Yeah. Yeah. That's a real interesting idea. What about the bell tower? Has there been any thought of actually rebuilding the bell tower, the fog bell tower?
Not recently. And there's also another wood barn that could be rebuilt too. We've thought about rebuilding the wood barn and putting a handicap bathroom in it.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't talked about the bell tower, in part because and it's a question that of the erosion that has taken place over the years. Where would we put it? We might not be able to put it where it really was.
Right. Well, since you bring that up, let me ask you. I'm wondering if either of you, Brad or George, if you've seen. Well, it sounds like you have seen noticeable effects of climate change and/or erosion on Wood Island. Have you been seeing especially high tides in recent years? Increasingly severe storms, all the things that are being talked about with climate change. What are you seeing at Wood Island?
Well, we are monitoring it. We have one of our volunteers has been taking pictures of the same spot each year or every few years to make sure that we're not losing a lot. And I guess the answer is we're probably not losing a large amount because it's basically a rock island.
Yeah.
But we are losing some, and when the bell tower was taken down, it's entirely possible that it was right on the edge of things. So, we are watching that. We will clearly have to watch it with regard to the ramp, the Coast Guard ramp at the other end of the island.
Yeah. Rising sea levels would definitely have a big effect on that.
We're beginning to get a little bit of erosion underneath the boathouse this year. We noticed for the first time.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
One phenomenon, and to try to talk or attribute climate change, those changes to climate change becomes difficult because there is erosion and lighthouses have been moving away for a long time from the water. But this year, I thought we had seen, when we came out in the spring, evidence of extraordinary water levels and storm downfall from within the island. Of course, the foliage covered it up nicely, but it really looked as though there had been some severity that we hadn't seen before. And along the walkway, just before you got to the to the lighthouse itself, we had a small pond, a large pond or small lake evident, and we've never seen that before in the spring. And I'd have to say, I don't think we had abnormal snowfall that would have explained that. And so it was arguable, I suppose, that is a harbinger of climate change.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a big subject, and we could talk more about that. But obviously, as you said, George, having a rocky island makes it less susceptible to fast erosion, more than some of the sandy places. But still, rising sea levels is something to watch. So it's come up a couple of times in the course of conversation today. But what are the woodchucks?
The woodchucks are a group of volunteers, probably our most flexible volunteer program, because people come when they can come and don't come when they can't come. But we have a large number of volunteers that come out every Tuesday morning throughout the summer and early spring, and the last one is going to be this week, to maintain the property. And they mow the lawns, they repair the gardens, they clean the house, and it's a great group of people. There are over 70 people on the list. However, of course, like every volunteer situation, there are those that come every single week and some that come sporadically. But it's a great program for us. We are so fortunate to have the numbers of volunteers that we have, both as docents as well as woodchucks. We always need more.
And then if somebody's interested in volunteering, how would they sign up for that or get more information?
Our website does have a segment in it on how to become a volunteer and describing the various ways that people can volunteer. The ways basically are being part of the woodchucks, being part of the docent group, being part of the crew on the boat, being part of the history group, and we have people that are working in all of those areas. And we're very, very fortunate to have as many as we do. But this year, for example, we expanded from 3 days a week to 4 days a week, and we got 9 new docents to help us out. But even then, we could always use more.
The day that Sarah and I were out there a couple of weeks ago, you had some volunteers, but you also had a group, kind of a visiting group from a company, local. What was the company? The people that were out there that day?
IDEX. I think they were all IDEX, weren't they, George?
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
And for a very prominent company. And they've got a group of people who are repeat volunteers and new ones. I mean, we have trouble finding projects for them because there are so many of them that want to come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they were doing a lot of good work out there. They painted the whole boathouse the day we were out there.
Yep.
And we have volunteers from Towns of Maine, and I'm trying to think who the
Roxy Sugar.
Oh, Roxy Sugar, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
and some of those volunteers then become our volunteers, and they're a very, very dedicated bunch.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I'm going to ask you about public tours, because whoever is listening by now, you should know that you have to get out there and visit. I was telling Brad earlier, it's one of my favorite lighthouse visits I've ever been to, and I think super unique. The long walk out there, the nature preserve around it, and getting there by boat is super awesome. So what's the season for tours and how do they work?
Well, our season is the months of July and August. We start July 1st, we end August 31st. Sometimes we do Maine Open Lighthouse Day in September, although sometimes the weather prevents us from doing that, as it did this year. And the way the tour works, first of all, you register through our website, www.woodislandlighthouse.org. And you make a reservation. You can do that starting on June 1 of any year. That you can register for a tour throughout the entire July and August season. And the way the tour works, people arrive at Vines Landing, which is in Biddeford Pool. Our boat is a aluminum landing craft, which has a drop front so that it lands on the beach at Vines Landing, and it lands on the Coast Guard ramp at Wood Island. So it's a walk-on, walk-off situation, and you have to walk across a half-mile boardwalk to get to the lighthouse, and the tours last an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours.
Awesome. And during the tours, do guests get to climb the lighthouse?
Yes. They climb the tower. They are taken through the house. The house is furnished to 1906. All of the furnishings inside the house are 1906 vintage. Most of them have been donated to us, some of them purchased, but they are all to the correct period. Coast Guard people and Lighthouse Service people brought their own furniture out there. So there is very little in the house that belonged to a keeper, but we have a few things from the Burke family.
Awesome. Yeah, I could have spent hours in there. All of the little details of everything from that time period was so awesome to see. All the old chairs, all of that was super, super cool. So if you haven't already, get out there, anybody who's listening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So before we wrap things up here, let me just ask you guys about the license plate, the Maine Lighthouse license plate that was developed in the past couple of years by somebody in your group. You want to say a little bit about that?
You, George.
Okay. Sean Murphy, who was mentioned earlier as one of the original founders of Friends of Wood Island Lighthouse, really wanted to have a Maine lighthouse plate. I mean, lighthouses are iconic to Maine. And so he left our board, formed the Maine Lighthouse Trust, and was really the sole person behind the activity to gather up $50,000 worth of commitments that people would use a lighthouse license plate. And our organization contributed to a founders program so that we will eventually benefit in some ways from the money that comes through the Lighthouse Trust. But Sean was really the main driver behind that whole program, and the picture that's on the lighthouse license plate, which you're beginning to see pretty frequently in Maine now, is our lighthouse, Wood Island.
Yeah, I was aware of that. I should mention also, Sean is one of your boat captains, and actually was the captain of the boat the day we went out there a couple of weeks ago.
Sean continues to volunteer for the Woodchuck Days. We have 3 captains who are paid captains that run the tours, but Sean and Russ Lowell are our volunteer captains for the Woodchuck Days.
Mm-hmm. Brad, just kind of an aside for you, a question I wanted to ask. I know you're also an accomplished watercolor artist. I think I saw something online recently about you do like workshops. Is that correct?
That's not accurate. And accomplished should have quotations around it. I've been doing it for years and years, and I've painted the lighthouse, not with the IDEX people, but on a piece of paper. And I have been an instructor for the York County Senior College, but mostly I take workshops. I don't give them.
Okay. I knew that there was some sort of instruction or something like that you were involved with. Is there a way people can see your work online?
No, not really.
Okay. Well, that's okay.
You have to get one of his Christmas cards.
That's right. You got to get on my Christmas card list, but don't bother this year because so far I haven't thought of a subject.
If
I've been
people
doing-
become a volunteer for FOWIL, do they automatically in your Christmas
No,
card list?
no. I mean,
Sorry.
I send out about 200 of them. I don't need any more.
Right. I completely understand that. We have one more question for you here. And this is for bonus points. I'll let Sarah go ahead and ask the question here.
So what is your favorite thing about Wood Island Lighthouse and the work that you do there?
Either one of you can jump in first.
Well, for me, it's a beautiful place. And I can think of nowhere that I would rather be on a sunny summer day than out there at the lighthouse. That's one thing. And the other thing is that I've worked with a lot of volunteer organizations over the years. And one of the things about working with Friends of Wood Island Lighthouse is that we're all pulling in the same direction. And therefore everyone is enjoying what they're doing because we're all trying to get the lighthouse restored and to educate people about the legacy of lighthouses. And so everyone's pulling in the same direction. There's no politics. And it's just a fun organization to be part of.
I could almost say ditto, because indeed I was headed in the same direction. The thing I will amend for George, though, is spending a day out there with a paintbrush is a much better way. It's a wonderful place. For me, it is the place, and by place I mean the island and the lighthouse, because as restored now and as it has been since we've started, you are really transported away from modernity. You are going back to an island that probably looks very similar to what it was in the days of the halcyon days of the lighthouse, and this, but take that thing, the lighthouse, and its physical presence, and for me, my favorite thing is that we have in our volunteers all the things that George said. And curiously, over the 19 years of doing this, whenever it became necessary for a resource to be available, somehow someone showed up, or we've discovered they had it in their capacity to do. So we are always on I wonder where we're going to get that. And almost instantly we've got it. We need a floor cloth, Amy builds a floor cloth. We need a boat, Sean was enough of a waterman to find a design and see it through construction. It is just, if you go up the tower, you're going to now go up a double helix railing that was constructed by one of our volunteers, Kyle, and he's a superb craftsman. And this year he refinished it, and it's like a piece of finished furniture. When you want to build a library box, which everybody wants in the lighthouse business, we can get you the drawings. But you find the craftsman who can, first of all, interpret those drawings. I looked at those when we got them. And you'll find that that's very hard to find the person who can do it. And the fellow who did ours had the added capacity that in addition to being an expert woodworker, he is a metal worker. He was metal worker before he was a woodworker. So the metal strapping around it, he was able to build. And we have just the most gorgeous library box that you could want. And I literally hate to stop here, because there are numerous examples of this kind of talent just emerging from somewhere. And where did that come from?
Yep.
It's just it is everything that George said about volunteerism, but that special technique, capacity is something that I just marvel at every day.
Yeah. First of all, we haven't said a lot about the fact that FOWIL is a chapter of the American Lighthouse Foundation. And as a longtime board member of the American Lighthouse Foundation, on behalf of ALF, I want to thank you guys and everybody in FOWIL for what you've accomplished over the years. And it's really just a shining example of what can be done by a volunteer group at an island light station. It's hard to think of any that are more so, as far as island light stations, there's special challenges, and you guys have just done a tremendous job. So thank you so much for all that. Thank you for joining me today for this interview. It's gone on a while. I appreciate you hanging in there, and I also want to thank, of course, Dick Parsons, who had to leave a little bit early, who contributed a lot about the history of the place. And I want to mention his book again, Wood Island Lighthouse Stories from the Edge of the Sea, which anybody who wants to know more about this place needs to get the book. And Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It was good to see you all again.
Yeah.
One question.
Go ahead.
Where do we cash in our bonus points?
Geez, nobody's asked that before. I gotta figure something out for that. There'll be a way. There'll be a way. You'll get credit in one way or another.
We look forward to it.
Yeah, it's all karma. It'll come back to you. So thank you so much, George and Brad. I really appreciate everything.
You're most welcome. We've enjoyed.
Thank you.
While we were in the keeper's house, I had a chance to chat with one of the Wood Island volunteers who do all kinds of hands-on work at the light station. The volunteers are known as woodchucks, and the woodchuck I spoke with was Christine McDonald. Let's watch that clip now.
We're lucky enough to be standing here with a woodchuck, or woodchick, as she calls herself, Christine. So one, you could explain to us what it means to be a woodchuck and how you got involved. That would be awesome.
Sure. I saw an article that they were looking for volunteers, and I thought it would be a great thing to do. So I signed up, went to a meeting, met all of these wonderful people. So basically, I've been doing this for 2 years. My husband just joined me this year. And woodchucks, woodchicks, we come over every Tuesday. We take care of the grounds, the flowers, we clean the inside, just keep everything, because we have tours Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we come over and make the place sparkling clean on Tuesdays.
Awesome.
Yes.
What is your favorite thing about the lighthouse and the island?
Oh, there's so many. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
It just is. I mean, the grounds, and I always run around taking pictures.
Mm-hmm.
It's just beautiful.
You can never capture how beautiful it is.
It is. It's so
We
beautiful.
were coming up, like the magic of then you see the lighthouse kind of appear.
Mm-hmm. I know, once you come down the boardwalk and then you see part of it and then you go further and you
Yeah.
see more. It's just, it's beautiful here. I love it. Love it. Mm-hmm. Great organization.
Awesome.
That about wraps up our two-part episode about Wood Island Light Station. Thanks so much for being a part of this, Sarah, both as co-host here and as the on-camera person for the videos on the island. I hope you had a good time.
I absolutely did, and thanks for inviting me to join along.
You're very welcome. And thank you to everyone associated with the U.S. Lighthouse Society and its chapters and affiliates. Check out uslhs.org to learn more.
Mark Twain once wrote, quote, 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than those you did. So throw off those bowlines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the wind in your sails, explore, dream, discover, unquote.
We will be back with a new episode of Lighthearted next weekend. For now, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
shine.